Hi, I am Mark Malkoff, and welcome to Inside Late Night, presented by LateNighter.com. Today on the show, Jon Schneider from the Saturday Night Network talks to me about Saturday Night Live from 1993 to 95. They had two tough seasons. We talk about the highs, we talk about the lows, we talk about so much more. Join me. Now it is time to go Inside Late Night. Jon Schneider, Saturday Night Network. Good to see you again.
Great to see you, Mark.
So this is one of my favorite subjects because I was watching this era of SNL growing up, and it was, it was conflicting because there were some really amazing sketches that I think are some of the best in the history of the show, and then there were others in the season more than others because it was always the show can always be inconsistent, but I don't know if it was ever this inconsistently. There were brilliant sketches, but overall it just wasn't working, and that's the '93 to '95 era of the show. I wanted to look at it. I wanted to dissect it. I want to talk about what. Looking back, it's a lot easier to look back and be like, what went wrong and what were the specific things that they could have maybe fixed or gone in a different direction. And just looking back, how if there was a time machine, I guess, or at the time, um, that if they were talking to me, maybe that they would realize that there were a few things that they might have could have done to improve the show. Not in only not only in terms of the critics. The critics were really hard on the show, but just the people watching at home would hear lots of silence more than maybe any time in this show's history. I would maybe argue, maybe Dominion, maybe might be close, but that was rough 2 years. There were definitely highlights and amazing shows, but overall, it was a tough 2 years that I think I would have loved to see Peacock cover a documentary on those years or one of those years with the people looking back. They kind of touched upon it a little bit, but not in the depth that I would have hoped for.
Yeah, well, we did do we're doing a mini documentary series at the Saturday Night Network called Everything You Need to Know About SNL. So we did talk a lot about what I would, call the downfall of this era and, start going into certain episodes and why things happened the way that they did. But I always felt like it was like a two-prong situation. Number one is they really set it up that the bad boys were going to be replacing and becoming the new stars of the show. And they were pushing them hard and marketing them as like the new cool hip cast. And it really is a tone shift from what worked years earlier in the late 80s, where when they finally nailed it with Phil and Jan and Kevin and Dana, like when they had those people, there was like an ensemble maturity to the performances that I think like that sort of reminded people of the original cast. And I think as individually talented as all of the guys that they brought on I don't know that they mesh well as an ensemble in sketches. Like you had a lot of duos and it felt very like inside jokey in a way that the comedy didn't elevate the way it did earlier.
In terms of the bad boys who you're mentioning, they definitely didn't have the versatility of a Groundlings, maybe
Yeah.
Second City, with characters like you would later see with people like Farrell and people with Sherry O'Terry.
Well, they hired a lot of stand-ups, right? And it's actually like the closest comparison for people who are watching now is like that's what they did in season 48, like a couple years ago, is that they hired a lot of stand-ups because all these places were closed due to COVID, so they couldn't do proper auditions. And like whenever the show leans stand-up, like personally, I think the quality diminishes. I think it's okay to mix like some stand-ups in there, but like when you lean heavy stand-up, it creates a little bit of a different vibe of the show.
It was at the point where Al Franken was telling people. I had heard from somebody that said, "How do I get on SNL?" At the time, he said, "You have to write for the show. You have to do stand up." They were hiring primarily stand ups or Harvard Lampoons if you got into Harvard, and the cast members. Now I understand why. And that season, the hires were all stand ups, and the writers were all either stand ups or Lampoons. And I don't know how many people, other than the Lampoon people, I'm sure they submitted to the show, but the stand-ups that they hired, without doing packets to my knowledge, I get why they did it because it worked with Sandler It worked with Schneider and Spade. They all hired them blindly based on their auditions, and they turned out they could write sketch comedy. What they didn't realize is if they tried to do this again, that there would be people, Jay Moore, that couldn't write sketch comedy. Sarah Silverman acknowledges at the time she got 0 sketches on the air and couldn't do it. There were people like Dave Attell, who I think got 2 sketches on the entire season. One was his idea, which was Love Boat: The Next Generation for Patrick Stewart, and the other one was I think when Emilio Estevez was hosted, which was what was it, Geek Dweeb or Spaz, something like that.
Yeah.
So there was a bunch of hires of people, and the three and Norm Macdonald they brought in as well, but in terms of somebody like Sarah, who is really, really fun and she was great on Update, I will never understand why they first of all didn't do writing packets to see if they could actually write sketch comedy. Two, why they wouldn't bring in some Groundlings or Second City people instead of stand-ups. I don't understand that to this day why they just didn't balance. It really, really hurt them.
Well, I think from the naked eye, like people's perception of that time is that there was like a hard transition from one era to another, but there was actually a pretty smooth transition happening in the previous seasons. Like in season 16, you still had Jan there. Eventually, you'll lose Victoria and then Dana and then Phil. But like having those people with all of these new hires created magic. And those seasons end up being pretty good despite how large the cast was. It was when you lost all of those people, and then now the focus was on, people like Sandler and Farley and Spade. Like they ended up being the leaders of the cast, and I just don't think that they're like that was the position to put them in. And I think that the writings, it just turned into a different show, and I don't think that is sustainable.
Both Jim Downey and Rob Schneider foreshadowed that this was going to be rough because they lost, and I know I'm a broken record, but it's the truth. They lost Smigel, they lost Jack Handy, they lost the Turners, they lost Christine Zander. I think Downey said basically it was 80% of the stuff that was getting on and that they won the Emmy the year
Yeah.
before. I mean, it was the last time I think the show's ever won when they were up against everything for the best show. I don't think they've won since for best show is on in the Emmys. I could be off on that, but I mean it was a huge ratings triumph. Wayne's World, was still they were still huge with that. Carvey was there half the season, and when they lost those writers and they did not do packets with the stand-up people that I'm aware of, and they hired all these. Robert Smigel told me that later Lauren, looking back on those 2 seasons, said that too many Harvard people, and I think that you can see an influence there that might have been that might have seeped in a little bit, but definitely with those writers, I just don't know why they wouldn't. Maybe they did look at packets and they didn't like any and stuff, but bringing in like an Adam McKay or going to Chicago, it could have saved them a lot of pain.
No doubt. And also, like, I'm talking a lot about the cast and you're talking a lot about the writers. I mean, I'm totally with you on the writers. I think that they lost some like really legendary writers. Obviously, there was a late night shift that was occurring in the early 90s, which I think probably took a lot of talent away from the SNL family in a way that like, you'd end up getting like Paula Pell who would stay on for 20 years. Like you didn't have that then. So I think there was a lot of turnover. They were trying to figure out how to bring people in. I think that there was because Franken and Downey had been there from basically the beginning, I think the upward mobility that could have been there for some of those writers, like Smigel, probably wasn't there. And then I know that there was sort of a pseudo offer of like him being a producer in season 21 and he'll eventually come back and do TV Funhouse. But I think that like the people who left in the early 90s that were those like mega talented writers probably would have stayed on had they been given more power at the show and didn't have that opportunity.
Terry Turner told me he couldn't get out of there faster. I mean, they were burned out. I think that they had a kid at that point, but I mean, it was definitely one of those things where I remember talking to Terry Turner. He's like, "Yeah, Phil stayed forever, which was 8 years, and now that's nothing."
Yeah.
With staying in the writers, it was designed at that point. You would stay maybe 7 years, and if you were there for any longer, it was considered you were kind of ancient. Now they brought back Marilyn Suzanne Miller, who's an amazing writer, and I have so much respect. Her style at the time, though, not at the time, her style which in the '70s shined on SNL. It was a very different style of, and she got very little on the show, and I don't think it was a fit. Tom Davis told me that actively there were people at the show that were trying to fight for him not to get his stuff on, and I know famously that Sally Field sketch, he wrote this sketch where she prays too much and Jesus comes back to ask her not to pray as much. That she basically, Sally Field wanted to do it, and she's like, he said to her, "You are going to have to fight for this sketch to get on because I cannot. I'm not going to be able to do this." And I know that there are a couple other pieces that he wrote where the same thing happened, where it's he told the writers. So I think it was just, I think it was tough. David Tell, I mean, was sneaking out during rewrites to do stand up. I mean, it just I don't know how if people really wanted to be there. Jim Downey was people say was going through a divorce and would be keeping people till like 4 a.m. on Thursdays, which I don't know if that exists anymore for rewrites for no reason. Jay Moore wrote in his book, and I don't know if it's true, that Downey would show the people in the middle of the night basketball clips from his high school in Illinois. Um, yeah, it just seems very strange time.
Well, I also think it's interesting because like they've never had such an extended run as they had then. Like the 5 year original run was like the only experience of great SNL for the people who were working there at the time. So for them to like continue this momentum starting in season 12, and then you're getting into 16, 17, 18, and things are still like doing somewhat okay. I don't think they ever knew like how long the runway was going to be. And as people continued to burn out, it really took executive intervention to put a stop to all of this. Because like I don't know, like does if the people in LA like don't get involved, like does Lauren continue to try and like extend the tail of this cast into the early 20s? Because that's why I find season 21 so fascinating, because the resurrection of the show is actually really interesting to me post all of this. But for this, it's just like a slow descent into chaos. And there, like you said, there are some good sketches. There are some good episodes, as is every season in season 20. But it is like a slog.
I will say this: there are things that people believe that are not true, and I will give you an example. Nancy Kerrigan had some really funny sketches. People still will show these in like the best of. Yeah, the last half hour was really, really rough. After update, it got dead silence. But that sketch that I believe Norm wrote with the Olympics was really, really funny. Got huge laughs. The one with the pre-tape with Farley and Kerrigan skating is shown in the best of. It was definitely one of those things where the ratings were high, the expectations were high, and the last after update and after it just it definitely fizzled. But if they had YouTube back then with two sketches that worked really, really well, I think that people might have looked back a little bit more. And she had obviously no very little range, like a lot of sports people. I don't know. Maybe they could have used her better. The Denise show with Sandler got laughs as well. I think that people looking back, they watched at least like the first half hour or 40 minutes would see that they're wrong.
But I think pretty famously that show, the cast and the writers were like very upset that she was booked as the
I
host.
know Mike Myers was. There might have been. All I know is Lauren is so smart when it comes to, controversy. I mean, that was on the. It was huge news. It's just they didn't deliver. I mean, in terms of at least the last half hour, they did those sketches where she's at Disney World and stuff. Complete silence, and it didn't help them either that no standbys got in. I mean, now again, I know I talk about this all the time. You're getting 70 to 80 standbys in every single show this season for live show and dress. And they were not doing that back then. Nobody, not one single person was let in for that show. It's going to affect the audience.
Who was in the audience for that show?
All VIPs. I mean, they didn't let any standbys in. What they would do when I think that they still do this is it's 100 lottery winners, tickets, 100 tickets sent to 50 people across the United States. Back then, that would send in postcards. And if you're in Seattle, you would have a week and a half to book your trip to New York. And inevitably, I'm guessing at least half the people could not use these tickets.
Well, the first time I was invited to the show, I was invited 24 hours before
This
the
is what
show.
I'm saying. This is what happens with the show. So you might have 50 people that actually are fans, and the rest were VIPs. I mean, it was. absolutely. I get it because if you're in the talent department, there are certain people that you are going to have to please, and you're going to have to book for political reasons. I get it, but to not have any VIPs, there would be sketches that are the most beloved things in the last 20 years that if they didn't have VIPs, if they didn't have any standbys in, I question whether they would have gotten laughs and if the public would look back at them and be like, this was really funny. There's very few sketches that didn't do great. Like Potato Chip did okay and stuff, and it was really, really, really funny. But if you didn't have any standbys in there, I don't know if that would have gotten anything and if people would have talked about it.
I think people would have
Basically,
talked about it.
they probably would, but I think that there's absolutely though sketches where the public and the critics will watch the show, and if people in the stands are laughing, it's a funny show. I mean, that's they
Yeah.
rely on the laughter. I mean, for good or for bad, it's very rare that you'll hear either a critic or somebody, a fan, be like, you know what, when they got big laughs, that show was not good or those sketches. I mean, I really feel like the psychological thing of the laughter is not looked at enough.
I've said before that I think that the show, and I don't know what's the truth or not. Like I am not in their heads, but like the idea that the show is relying on the dress audience to decide which sketches they're going to put on air is my least favorite part of the entire SNL process. I think so it's so not an indication of like what will like last online and what will be make for a good show. Like people who are going in there are primed to laugh at everything. Like it's not going to tell you whether things are good or not.
I've seen it. I've seen it. I remember being at the Bob Saget TLC show when they had I think the track meet. The dress wasn't a strong dress. The cold open that they didn't even make it into the show. They moved Sandler's update piece talking about basketball to the cold open. And they did, I remember the track meet, which was near the end of dress, getting a little bit more than everything else, but still not playing great. And they moved it all the way up. And I mean, I would argue also the chicken wing sketch with Christian Slater, 91, 92 is another thing. Smigel mentioned Jim Downey, Spade, and Schneider wrote that piece, which is another thing. Like, I can't believe this got on. There, I don't want to
But
mention it
but
because
it was different then, Mark, because
why?
then like you didn't have stan culture. Like now there is that like all the people who are coming in for the standby are like so obsessed with the idea of Saturday Night Live,
Yeah,
which and like look, I think those people are important for the show. Like it's great that
they
there's like
are.
a following there. But I think that like I don't know that that was there in the 90s. Obviously there was big fans of comedy and people who were excited to see the show, but not people who would go in and love everything no matter what and just like are so obsessed with one
It's
particular cast
true.
member.
There would still be if you put the standbys in, it still was a culture where things could bomb. The same way that Johnny Carson, you would have silence, where you do not have silence anymore during monologues with late night hosts. It's not that the quality is shot up; the audiences have changed. Um, they clap no matter what. It's a very different. I do want to talk about some of the highlights of 93, 94. I mean, to me, early on, I mean, I thought Shannon Doherty was really strong host, and they spoofed her personal life in the monologue with her getting married, and she's just really rude and screaming, and it was funny. And then the real world sketch, which David Mandel wrote, was really, really funny with the Denise show, which Steve Coren penned. I thought overall that this was a very, very strong show where the Barclay premiere, and traditionally a lot of times premieres don't go great. This is Barclay's first time hosting, not the strongest premiere by any means.
No, definitely not. I think that probably lives in the shadow of Michael Jordan's episode. So they were trying to maybe recreate that magic that they had. But I do agree. Shannon Doherty's was really good. I mean, there's a lot of going on there with Cypress Hill as well. With I think that they lit joints during their performances and they weren't supposed to. But Shannon was a really good host. Like, and sometimes like the women hosts of those eras don't get the credit because they weren't asked back 5 or 10 times the way that you had with like Baldwin and Goodman. But people like Shannon, people like Heather Locklear, they were really good hosts that could have come back again.
It's absolutely true. The next week, Lou Morden and Rob Schneider wrote that Subway sketch with Rob Schneider playing the guitar for don't people are putting in coins and in bills, and he is basically is it he's singing songs that are clearly about the people that are standing around, but then trying to play off that they aren't personal. It's, I believe is it Sandler one asks if he can do a duet with him or something, but
Yeah, Sandler's
it's
playing the harmonica.
yeah, it's such a funny well, it's a perfect sketch. The rest of the show, I thought the cold open was very ambitious. Michael Jordan, was it Michael Jordan was leaving? I remember just it was a cold open because I remember Steven Tyler when was in it, and it was a really fun thing with the entire cast. But again, after that sketch, it just goes down in terms of the audience energy, and it was really tough. But the monologue with Jeff Goldblum and the talking about the dinosaurs with all the writers with the questions was hilarious.
That was very good as well. I still think like the beginning of 19, we could continue to talk episode by episode, but the beginning of 19, I actually think is really solid.
Yeah. But once they get past that, I mean, oh my goodness. John Malkovich has that brilliant sketch where they're doing what was that movie called In the Line of Fire where he is calling up he thinks it's the president but he's getting wrong numbers. Like that was it. I think the last sketch of the night which they should have brought up to the cold open, but that didn't was a tough show. The Christian Slater show was awfully rough. Rosie O'Donnell was not as strong. The monologue was very strong. Nicole Kidman, other than maybe the cold open with Wayne's World, and I mean, the monologue was good. Definitely Philip, the hyperactive kid, but there were like 4 or 5 shows that were just not. It wasn't gelling.
Yeah, like it wasn't. See, I don't think it was so bad. Like I think that there was stuff where like maybe it wasn't fully gelling. Like obviously the quality had dipped from 17 to 18, but like I think there is one show coming up that is the turning point that I've always felt like that was the one.
The one. Okay, well, let's keep going. First of all, David Mandel. Thank goodness for David Mandel. I mean, the Charlton Heston episode, which goes in December of '93. I would loved when he would play with the format. I just loved the format where he took the Planet of the Apes cold open, and all the credits didn't have the actors' names, and it was them just doing Planet of the Apes, and his I mean, it was just so amazing, so brilliant. And then Fred Wolf and Norm wrote a really funny sketch, the Bag Boy Edwin. I feel like that this was a show that gave me a little bit of hope, and I love when they would bring back the older performers.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I always say is great in any era because I always look for hosts that are different than anyone who is in the cast. So if you're going to get an older person to host, then the contrast between them and the roles that they can play versus what the cast would typically play in sketches really allows for new comedy to be found from the writers. And that's why like a Heston really works. I think that's why like Betty White was so exciting. I mean, there's a lot there, obviously, with the women of SNL coming back, but I think like the idea of having someone who's just so different from a host as opposed to being like another part of the cast really stands out to me.
To me, when I knew the season was in trouble, was Jason Patrick
That's the one.
100%. I remember where I was when I was watching this, and I just was sitting there in disbelief with the lack of audience laughs. Now, there are a couple reasons where this could be. One is, as Johnny Carson would say, acceptance is 80%. If you're a known entity, it's a lot easier to get laughs. Where Jason Patrick, nobody that knew who this guy was. I mean, they would bring in certain people. Like I remember Mary Stuart Masterson the first time I was at SNL. She was up and coming. Sometimes they would do this. They would bring people in where the audience might not know them, but it is awfully hard for these people as unknowns to get laughs. And a writer told me later that, or I have overheard him actually say that apparently he just didn't think Jason Patrick wanted to be there the whole week, and it kind of showed.
Well,
But
that was in the monologue, right? That was the whole concept of the monologue.
it was, and I think that they wrote it because that was what kind of vibe he was giving off. But I mean, the monologue was absolutely painful, and the people there should never be let back into the show because if you were not there to at least laugh a little bit, I mean, it was like, who did they let in on this? I mean, they did the Andrew Giuliani cold open, which did well, and did a Fox football sketch after with us football coming to Fox, which was mixed the existing Fox
And
programs in with football
Richard
and
Simmons was on Coffee Talk, I think.
yeah, which, you know, it's always gonna Mike Myers, that sketch is, always gonna get laughs, and it did fine, but oh my goodness, the monologue and the rest of that show, man, they had I think
Yeah,
the last sketch was really, really funny on paper, and if they had an actual audience with Pulses, on the ski lift with Jason Patrick and Kevin Nealon, written by Sandler and I think Norm Macdonald, really funny, but nothing crickets, and that was the show where I said, "They are in trouble, they need to do something," and they really didn't do anything.
no, they're gonna hire McKeon, but like that's basically like in a few episodes, but that's basically all they did. And this to me was the episode I was referring to as the turning point of the season. I think that prior to this, there is some like up and down, like okay, the season's okay, maybe it's, but this is not notoriously bad. This episode is one of the worst episodes. It is like there are some bad episodes in the history of the show that are interesting. This one is so dull, so boring, and it is like very tough to watch, as you
I give Lauren a lot of credit for not sweetening or like doing audio effects because when I hosted a podcast about Johnny Carson, when he hosted the Emmys, they put in, even though he was doing it live, in as it was going on, he later found out that they were putting in adding laughs and special effects that weren't really there, and Carson was so furious that because he didn't want any of that, he wanted it all real, and I give Lauren a lot of credit that they didn't do that. I mean, if things changed, I have no idea. But back then, if things were gonna die, they die. You would hear that silence. You don't hear that anymore. But and this is another thing with Michael McKean. When has it ever worked in the history of entertainment with somebody says we're going to replace, we need a new Phil Hartman, we're going to replace Phil Hartman, we're going to have to replace Friends, we're going to do the new Friends. It never works. It's never worked once that I'm aware of. I mean, perhaps it has, but it seems like every time they want to do a clone or a fix, they said that they needed a Phil Hartman with Daryl Hammond, and it just didn't work. I mean, Phil Hartman was so versatile, and he could do things that weren't just celebrity impressions, and put his own spin on things. And it was just like, for them to think that McKean, it did not work. I mean, he's an amazing performer. I'm a huge fan of his work.
Well, look, Phil's irreplaceable. To me, he's the greatest cast member of all time, and he probably, like in another life, like he's the Keenan of this show. Like he's the one that sticks around forever because he was doing things that no one else would ever do. Like he was in the most SNL segments per episode ever. Like I think in season 17 he was in 145 SNL segments. Like it's as a record, it'll never be broken. It's like the home run race. Like it's just one of those things that's like he owned this show, and tragically, younger generations will never know. But
He
he is the
never
goat.
got credit. He was interviewed at the Rainbow Room, and you very rarely do you hear celebrities tell the truth when they're asked this. But he said, "Is it hard that Mike Myers and I don't think that they said Mike Myers, but other younger people went off to have these huge movies. Is it hard for you? Does it hurt?" And he's like, "Yeah, it does. It hurts." That guy never was acknowledged at all. Very similar to Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, when he was alive. But it was one of those things where Phil Hartman and I think Eddie Murphy are probably the greatest of all time. I mean, there's a couple others, but like Seth Meyers was just on Vulture podcast talking about his Mount Rushmore, four people, and he said Eddie, as he should, that was his first, and did not mention Phil Hartman. I was like, I don't know how you cannot have Phil Hartman on your list, but I mean,
Who is your
everybody's.
top four?
Oh gosh, I don't want to do this.
Oh, you don't want to do it?
You know what? I will say definitely Eddie. I will say Phil. Um, I will work on this. I will definitely think about this. Because I don't want to be the person that's like, okay, you're going to pick who was the cast in that from high school. I definitely would have to think about that a little
I have
bit.
a very clear answer for this.
Well, who were your answers? Who would you be?
Phil, no doubt, first name on the Mount Rushmore. There's no question about it. Will Ferrell, the biggest star that SNL's ever had. Then Kristen Wiig, who changed the way that we look at women on the show and just ran the show for many seasons. And I will put Dana Carvey in there as well as just being the most
I
versatile
like it.
performer probably ever. I had Bill Hader very close to it. He's since dropped out. Just the legacy and him not coming back with 50th. Eddie is like right there as well. It just Eddie, I had out like right outside for so long because I had trouble putting him in my top four when he clearly did not like the show that made him a star. I have a difference of I have a different opinion today sitting here because of just what he did coming back for season 45 as a host, coming at the 50th and just crushing it. Like I almost feel that I'm like compelled to put him back in there, but like he's probably five right now.
Wig is unbelievable in terms of a performer, but I would say what are well-written Kristen Wiig sketches. I mean, there are some, yes, there are some, but it seems like a lot of them rely just on her making faces, or just there were not jokes there that I'm aware of. Am I wrong on that? I just would see her.
I think you're wrong because, like, first of all, that's my cast, so I will defend it, and
Can
I
you
will
give me
say that
some specific sketches and some writers? Because it seemed like some sketches that I would see where she would just be, it would be her inflection in her voice or just making faces, and that, and it was very, very funny. But in terms of the writing, it was lost on me a little bit.
for sure. Like, I think, well, first of all, I think she's an incredible actor, like one of the best
One
in the
hundred
history of
percent.
the show. Yeah,
Seth Meyers said she had the best audition. I have no doubt. She was unbelievable.
yeah, and you see it a lot, like very early on in those first couple seasons. But like, I do think like the stuff she did with Paula Pell, like Aunt Linda, the woman who's like the one upper character, blanking on her name right now.
Penelope was very funny. There were. It just seemed like maybe it was just that there were some really well written pieces. Susie Orman. There were some good pieces for sure. It just seemed like that. It just maybe the writers, like with Will Ferrell, they wanted their pieces on, and they just they just would always cast her, and it just got some of the stuff that got on just seemed very groundlings heavy with behavior stuff without
I
attention
think
to
you have to take into
writing.
account, Mark. Like,
Yeah,
there's something like sometimes there's a performer that comes on the show that is like a sparkly person. Like they just you can't take your eyes off them. And
agreed.
she has that quality in a performer that I know that you really value the writing, and I will never discount. Like, okay, are the Kristen Wiig sketches Mount Rushmore sketches? So I won't take that away from you and what you're saying. But what I will say as like performers on the show is like she is one of the only people in the history of the show that I could say like there was a period of time where this was her show. She was running circles around everybody. Everybody wanted her in their sketches. She made everybody better. And there had never been a woman on the show who had really done that consistently for so long. Like Amy stabilized things in a bad time. Tina's obviously really important to the writing side, but like Kristen was like SNL. Like she's the front of the marquee, and that
She
to me was
was.
unbelievable.
Just because that they take one person and they give them lots of stage time doesn't necessarily. They could have done well. Some people would argue that was they did that with Dana Carvey, but there were episodes where he was absolutely light. He was not like 80%. There was nobody. They could have done that with Gilda. They could have done that with anybody and just made them like put them in everything. That they did with Wig, and that was a choice that they made, and it worked. And I mean, she is phenomenal. Like, I mean, I just wish
But
sometimes.
it's not quantity. I'm not valuing quantity over quality. To be like just to be clear, like just because like Bowen like is in a lot of stuff now, it's not like I'm saying like that all works for me. Like it doesn't. Like there are eras of the show where someone is on the most, and I'm not saying that they're the best on the cast, but like I just think she fits all of the things that I look for in a cast member in terms of like best, like was she built in a lab to be on the show? 100%. Greatest, does she have the accomplishments that I think that make her so important to the history of the show? Absolutely. And then legacy, like her legacy is bigger than most cast members in the history of the show. So if you're hitting all three of those to me, that makes you so great, which is why I think that Phil is my GOAT, because Phil, as far as I'm concerned, like maybe he loses some legacy points in terms of like he's just not around anymore, but I can't discount him for that in terms of the value that I placed on his role on the show. So if we're heading back to our conversation about 19, Phil being on his way out is the biggest, like the dam's about to break, and then this is the final piece.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I hear what you're saying about Wig, and absolutely brilliant. I remember one of her very first sketches with Alec Baldwin, I believe, in the car, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, they've hit the jackpot with this person, and they need to be putting her in. And really pushing her, which they did. I didn't realize that it was going to become Will Ferrell in terms of like Will Ferrell, and then it was Wig, and then it was McKinnon, where they were going to take one person and just make them. I just really do like the more balanced ensemble. That's just a taste thing.
But you
Um,
think the show made them the star? Because I think that this was like a meritocracy where they made themselves the star. Like
it
they were
could have
so good that they forced themselves into
been.
the spotlight.
Maybe you're right. I will argue, though, Mike Myers and Dana Carvey did $200 million back in February of '92 with Wayne's World box office, and Lauren, to his credit, was not throwing them in everything and didn't make them the stars by any. In my opinion, I didn't see them getting more stage time. Perhaps that they were. Maybe they did a little bit more Wayne's World, but it seemed balanced to me for how big they were. More famous than the hosts. A lot of them.
Definitely, but that is what happens when you have Phil and Jan on the cast with them, who are so good on the show. Like in the Will Ferrell era, he was not only producing blockbuster movies. Eventually, like he'll have Old School and he'll be on SNL at the same time. Like he is. If I got that right, like I think he's also like he's doing stuff outside the show, but also on the show. But like I think like his supporting cast members are not as high quality as having like Phil and Jan at the same time as Wayne's World is out.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it was an amazing cast. It was an amazing group of people. Let's get him back to Phil Hartman, because it's the '93-'94 season, and he talks to TV Guide, and sometimes people get too comfortable with journalists. Perhaps he didn't think it was on the record. Perhaps he just did not care anymore, and he basically was talking about they needed to get. I believe this was the interview. He might have said it the following year, but he definitely did an interview where he was talking about some. I'm not going to mention who, but some of the bad boys, people who you mentioned, just that they were really thrust in them that season, and he didn't think it was working. He did suggest maybe more groundlings people and things like that. But I think he said in the TV Guide interview that they were on the Titanic. That was, I believe, what he said. And it's one of those things where I've talked to people away from the podcast, and I've read things where I've never heard of a show where if somebody does an interview, that it gets back to everybody at the show and they take it so personally. It's just, I mean, according to Phil, and I think Lauren has talked about this. That yeah, Lauren wasn't talking to Phil at that point, and it wasn't getting us a lot of stuff on.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the culture of communicating with the media was stronger then than it is now. Like, yes, like we can, you get to see cast members on podcasts and all that stuff, but I believe at the time Lorne would do press conferences with the cast, and then journalists would show up to 8H to like ask questions. And I think that the culture at the time was like sort of, it was a little bit of a free for all in terms of what people could say. I don't know how the PR department truly worked on a day to day there, but that would never fly now. Like there would never be a cast member now who would be able to say like, the show's not doing great while they're on it. And I think that um, for the show to maintain itself into the future, like these are things that maybe they should look back into, because I think that you can love Saturday Night Live while it's bad. Like it's not like people, as soon as the show is not doing great, that we're all going to turn off the TVs and not watch it. Like there's something interesting about bad SNL, and I think that like the show should continue to trust the audience that they would stick around.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where I mean, the audiences were still there, but I just the ratings were dipping a little bit. They were having trouble. They started having a little bit of trouble getting hosts. But if I'm looking right here, and they had some really tough shows. The Alec Baldwin Kim Basinger's show, I remember, was tough. Overall, Martin Lawrence was another episode that was not great and got attention for all the wrong reasons because of the monologue being, I get in reruns they couldn't show it. I mean, it was, and then I
Second
thought
worst rated show of the season, by the way. I have all the ratings for every episode
I thought it
from
came
that.
back like Helen Hunt. I thought was a really really strong show. I was there for that one. I mean, they didn't let anybody in for dress rehearsal or live show, but I was able to know people to get in. That I was back in the it was in the green room overlooking the studio for
Helen
that
Hunt
one.
was the fourth highest rated show of that season.
It was really, really that was a solid show, and then, I thought I was there for also for Kelsey Grammer. I thought that was a little tough. Emilio Estevez, I think it was Jason Patrick quality in terms of the audience's reaction to things. I mean, oh my goodness.
The
They even
Canings.
in the that Michael Fay cold open, um, and it was in the news. It was big that this gentleman in Singapore, an American tourist, I forget if he littered or what he did, but he was getting caned, and it was a big deal. And they did this cold open, and they at the very end, it's like I have some good news and I have some bad news. And the bad news is live from New York at Saturday night or something, acknowledging that the show was not good. David Mandel has said during um, they were still working on the monologue during, I believe, that when Pardo was doing the credits. I mean, it was just in terms of audience silence, it was rough that show.
Yeah, it was like the dog days of this season, and I think that there was a little bit of a crisis as to what they were going to do moving forward. And I think part of when you get to this point, I'm sure that the panic meter is set in, and they're like, okay, we need a couple of good shows before the end of the season to finish strong, and then we'll figure out what to do for next year.
Yeah, Pearl Jam was there, and they were so hot. And again, I mean, nobody's going to get into that show for standbys. It was just Emilio Estevez. There's some actually it's on YouTube. They have like some rehearsal footage of him doing promos with Lauren off camera, giving him notes, and it's like, can you do it a little bit more upbeat or a little bit? He doesn't
I
do
think
it.
they have that with the Barkley episode too, with Nirvana.
And there's absolutely no change in Emilio Estevez's low energy on those promos that I saw. Can you do it a little bit more upbeat? Sure. Hi, I'm Emilio Estevez. I'm hosting, and it was just, it was really fun.
Do you know what Emilio Estevez has uniquely for him as an SNL host that nobody else has?
Oh goodness, let's see. Maybe that did his father hosted his because his brother was on with him. Those are
Yeah,
the only things.
and his brother hosted as well.
Oh yeah, I never thought about. They had Charlie Sheen. That was, yeah. Oh my goodness, January of 2000, I think, something like that. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. I wanted to say though that season, that as rough as it was, you had Heather Locklear come in, and overall, yes, she was looking at the cue cards and she was criticized for that. But other than looking at the cards, that show was really strong. The Flirt, which was Steve Coren, which was a draw. They would it
I
was
think it's a potentially a top 50 show of all time.
it was really, really strong. I mean, the pasta maker, Fred Wolf, um, it was a phenomenal show. And it was tough because you have this and it's like, why couldn't they do this the rest of the season? And then I was in my head was like, okay, they're gonna come back then the next season and it's gonna be like this. They figured it out and they had even more problems the following season. Why do you some things that stand out um, that with the following season that maybe they could have done differently or looking back, were you optimistic? I was optimistic. I really was that they were going to figure it out. I thought it was just one season that they were going to be like, okay, we're going to.
Well, I almost feel like there's parallels between what Lorne decided to do and what Dick Ebersol did in season 10, which was like, we're in a little bit of a transition and let's hire some well-known performers to, get in the mix here.
Yes.
And like that to me worked really well with Marty and and Christopher Guest and all those guys like for a time, but I don't know that the ones that they put in here remotely had the stage presence and confidence to be able to pull off what they did in season 10.
They didn't have the versatility as performers, and I think you're absolutely right. They were said that this is what we're going to do. We're going to replicate this, and whenever they've tried to do that, it just hasn't. It to me, it hasn't worked. And I just remember being there for that show, and they do that Clinton audition cold open, which is so funny, and being like, they have the show back, and then Steve Martin comes out for the monologue, and it's really really rough from there on the rest of the show. I mean, I was backstage for it. I mean, that was the first time I was ever there and stuff. And just, I mean, I was just waiting, and it was, it just, I don't know. I mean, I remember the commercial that he did, the Steve Martin penis cream, was got lots of laughs. And Norm on Update did for his first effort. I thought did a very good job, but overall, I thought it was a really really tough episode.
Yeah, I so when you were backstage, like, did you hear anything interesting about Norm hosting Update for the first time? Like, were you like, did anybody like was like, oh my god, that was an amazing debut?
And there wasn't any time for that. I can't believe I'm going to talk about this, but I'll do this. So I got up to the green room, which was on the ninth floor, where it overlooks the studio. Before they let the audience in, it was between dress and live, and there's probably maybe I don't know, like 70, maybe 8. It was like probably maybe 10, 15 or so, something like that. And there was no audience loaded in yet. And I walk in the green room and it's Norm, Janine Garofalo, and Chris Elliott, and they're all in the green room smoking. Norm is in his leather jacket, and it's complete silence other than they nod at me and Janine. I had for other reasons, she kind of knew who we had met each other and stuff. And she's like, "Oh wow, I just spilled water. Sorry, Christine." And she's like, "Oh my goodness, you're in a suit," she said to me because I was with some friends in some suits. And I do want to go on the record. We were not supposed to be backstage where we were on eight, but yeah, they were just all completely calm. You could not tell that Norm was about to, you know, takeover update. Janine was extremely concerned. She did a sketch at dress rehearsal called Bank Line, which I asked her about. And at that point, she's like, "Did you see it? Did you see it? What did you hear?" And I said, I don't. I just had heard that you had done this sketch. It was her and Chris Elliott." And it turned out it was cut, but this was before they found out what was going to get in and what was going to get out. But she was extremely concerned with my opinion, and I was like, oh, "I'm just a 18-year-old kid that just moved here from the city, from Hershey, Pennsylvania. I have no idea." And yeah, they were just smoking, and it was just very, very chill. And Norm Macdonald, I was with my friends, and I said, they both left. I said, "Norm, is there any way you could take us downstairs to 8?" And he said, "Follow me." And Norm is all about anarchy and about doing things he's not supposed to do. And the suit saved us 100%. I mean, that's what got us down there. And
But
I
you
have
couldn't
so
just
many
walk
others.
down there because like 8 and
What?
9 are connected.
I didn't know how to get down there back then. There were no shows or anything back then on how. I mean, I guess if you had reruns from certain episodes back in the day where they would kind of show the different floors and stuff
Yeah.
and things, but I had
There's
no idea.
stairs that like are right off to the
Yes,
side of the studio that basically like because the cast members are going up and down all the time. Like
I didn't know that. That's where Norm took us down those stairs, and that's I'm like, I had no idea that's the way that you get down there. I mean, the stairs are so I think you've been over there. The stairwell is so like a regular stairwell. It's not
it's like going to a
decorated.
school and
You
seeing a stairwell like that. It's like so
you would
normal.
not think that it was a normal like, I looked at it and it's like, I would think that it would be aligned with, like, gold or, like, glamorous photos, and it's not. So I it didn't occur to me that this would be the way to get down to the 8th floor. So, yeah, we were in the green room, and then next to the green room is Lauren's office, which I had never been in at all, and that's where the A-listers and the alcohol is flowing and the food. We're in the green room without any water, no drinks, no food. I'm just there just for to see the show. It's an amazing, pristine view, and the cast and certain writers are coming in every so often just to see their guests and interact with them. But yeah, Norm took us down that stairwell, and we were down. Now, back then, there was a bench or a couch, and it was where they would show the show. Where there'd be like across from there would be like a craft service with a coffee maker, and it's exactly where they did the Dennis Miller cold open with George Wendt, where it was his final show. They would show it on certain monologues where they would go backstage. It would be where Mariel Hemingway, when she hosted the Will Ferrell's first show, where she was walking around. And there was this one area, and I was with Don Pardo and Andy Murphy, who was the token older gentleman who was in every sketch as the older person, and it was just us and my friends, and we're glued to this bench, and I'm just praying that I do not get kicked out because this is my dream that I'm 18 backstage at Saturday Night Live. And I couldn't believe that we were there. And I was just taking it all in because, again, there was no YouTube or anything where I'm like, how do they put this show together? What is going on? And I'm literally watching. Right by there, you can see like they have a vanity mirror with all the lights, which is still right there. And we're watching them get made up. And they have, there was those those cubicles where they can kind of like duck in and stuff. They have their names on where they do the quick changes. And it was basically like watching my own reality show that season premiere. And then you have all these like famous people that are coming down that are passing us to go see Lorne. And I'm like, I had zero self control back then, or very little self control for famous people. So it's like a-list celebrity comes by. I'm like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Whoever, Mrs." Shake their hand so I can tell everybody in Hershey I met this person. I mean, it's embarrassing to look back, but our suit saved us,
Oh, no doubt.
100%.
Okay, so people don't realize how little
Yeah,
security there is during a Saturday Night Live episode. It is and I say this like with love to the show. It's very funny. There's like security obviously right outside the studio. Like no one's like running in. Like there's no Sharon Stone like situation that's going to happen. But when you're backstage and you are like inside, you have permission to be there. Somebody brings you up from downstairs. You're allowed to be in somebody's dressing room. Essentially, it is like a mini cocktail party happening like there. At least that's my experience now, where like at one point like I had a drink, I was hanging out with some people, and then I was like, oh, I wanted to go see a different cast member who I had known and gotten to know a little bit better. So I just like left the dressing room on 8, walked by myself down the hall, walked up on 9, walked by other writers and cast members, like Colin Jost is walking by me, oh hey man, like Mikey, like I'm talking to them, and I'm like,
yeah.
this is so insane because I could basically do whatever I want right now. I can't go on
It
TV, but I could do whatever I
It
want.
was definitely, if you could get up there, for the most part, it was like that. I mean, there weren't even the wristbands back then. I mean, and there weren't the employees were not wearing, lanyards, so or badges. So, I mean, it was definitely a very unique time, and I was lucky, I was fortunate I got to watch the show from that point of view, a bunch of times, but, like, to be there for that and to kind of in real time just see people pass by us and giving us high fives after Sandler did Gil, whatever his character on Update with the rock star. He was the rock. Yeah, he comes by and is giving us high fives, and it's like, just he had just been there, and it's like it was just so surreal to be there, and it was one of those things where I need to get here as soon as humanly possible back here, but it was a tough show. I mean, it was a tough, and I was the following week was with Marissa Tomei. I thought was another tough show, but then with Travolta, I think that was one of the strongest shows. I mean, maybe that was the strongest show of the season. I mean, I thought it was just from the cold open where they did the welcome, the Saturday Night Fever cold open, to that brilliant piece with, I think, at Good Nights. I think it was a David Mandel thing where they break the form and they do a whole Grease song parody thing at Good Nights, which was absolutely brilliant. I thought that was just another one where I'm just like, please let it stay in this direction.
Oh, it was one of the best shows they had in a while. And I think it's arguably one of the best shows of the season. I'd say like there's a couple others in contention, but that ending was very like original era coded. It had like Desi Arnaz vibes of we're gonna go around the studio, we're gonna end this like this is an event. It's not so formulaic, and I think that was something that I think the show should have taken note of more in this season of like if we're gonna feel or we're gonna potentially be trying to stabilize this thing, we need to be more experimental with the type of stuff that we do. And Travolta like had that energy to be able to do that. And I think he was supposed to host years before, but then it didn't work out and he finally did this one.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely they nailed it on this one, and just I mean, and then for them, this is what I love about SNL. For them to do something called Quentin Tarantino's Welcome Back, Kotter. Quentin Tarantino was not at this point a known entity. He really, really wasn't. Pulp Fiction had opened the day before, and he was still very underground. And for them to take Welcome Back, Kotter, which was established, and do play to the top of their intelligence, I give them so much credit because I know majority of the people that are watching are not getting that Mr. whatever they were doing with with Reservoir Dogs. But it still played on a level. But I really appreciated that their intelligence. And then after this, Dana Carvey comes back with Robert Smigel. There was some good stuff, but it was definitely it was a mixed show. And then Sarah
Pepper
Jessica
Boys though,
Parker.
I think was like a
Oh yes, Steve
contender.
Coren. Yes, that was a killer sketch, and believe, let's see, I believe Dana said that that sketch took place in no man's land, whatever they call it, something else. I forget what it is, but it's the place where nobody wants to do their sketch
Yeah,
because they
someone
think it's
calls it
gonna.
Can Alley, I think it's called.
Yes, and that's where I believe where they did the what was it, the cowbell sketch.
Yeah.
And anybody that thinks that that's the factor that a sketch isn't going to play, I've seen sketches played there. If something's funny, it's going to play. I don't understand this obsession with home base. I guess it's they think that that's going to, that for whatever reason has the best chance of this sketch succeeding. But I've seen sketches that are like 80% like no view from the audience kill. But for whatever reason, people are obsessed. But to me, Sarah Jessica Parker, Jason Patrick vibes. I was like, oh gosh, from the very cold open, I was like, this is not going to go well, and it was really really hard. And again, you would never see this now with silences. I mean, just sketches with complete silences. It was hard.
I think she was a last minute replacement host for Juliette Lewis. Lorne was not there the majority of the week. His second child was just born, so there was that. Michael O'Donoghue had just died, and everyone had gone to like the I guess the funeral and the celebration of life that they had for him. It was just like there was a darkness over the week that I think was not great. And then on top of it all, this is the episode that has that Munchkin Land sketch where Janine almost quits because she doesn't want to do it. So I think it is chaos.
I thought I was okay. I mean, when Sarah Jessica Parker as Glinda says, "I'm really pissed off," I got a big laugh, which was the only laugh I think maybe in the entire sketch. It was rough. Again, you have REM and you had people that were camping out. I didn't camp out, but there were people that were obsessed more to be in to see REM, which you don't want people. You want people that are there to see the cast, ideally. But again, no standbys. They did 3 songs, which was extremely rare on air back then, and it just didn't work. I mean, and there were because I was outside there for part of it. There were people, the VIPs that were there that should not have been there. There were multiple ones. I'm not going to mention who they were that were intoxicated. That when they got there between dress and live, and it was they had to, I guess, feel like if they were famous, they had to let them in. But there were people that should not have been there that were not fans of the show that were there to see REM clearly, and they suffered the consequences, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a weird show. It's like there's a few in this season that I would say like there's 4 or 5 that I think are the notorious season 20 shows, and this is the first one of them.
I would say though that the John Turturro quiz show monologue, again, brilliant. I mean, it was so funny. I mean, there are certain things where Turturro had some good things here and there, but then you go to Roseanne, which was, I mean, it was a train wreck. Yes, Sandler, the Hanukkah song. This is where when I talk to people that say that this year was horrible, I say that's not true. There were a lot of hard shows. Roseanne was one of them, but I still say I could put together a best of this season, and it's still, if I do a best of, better than 90% of the best of other seasons subsequently, if they were not relying on digital shorts and videotape, but they're
That is a
going
very hot
slowly,
take.
if they're only doing live sketches, because they couldn't do digital shorts back then. If they had the ability to do 3 digital shorts an episode, which is so much easier to be able to edit something together than do a live show. I mean, I know you're looking skeptical, but there were
I am.
seasons
This is a little bit of a crazy take, Mark.
there were seasons when Andy Samberg was doing the digital shorts where I would ask fans that were obsessed with the digital shorts, okay, fine. Those were really funny, and I agree. Tell me the live sketches that you thought were really solid this season, and they'd struggle. That would speak volumes. The political stuff was strong, but I would ask other sketches. I would say, what do you think is really, really the last time they did a sketch that was really, really, and they would have a tough time with that. There were that's you disagree with that philosophy?
I do because I think like again I'll defend my era, but I'll say like I think when Seth takes over from Tina and quarterbacks the era, they do some really experimental things, especially in season 32, which is probably my favorite season in the history of the show. Especially with the entire cast. There's the song memory sketches that Brian Tucker used to do with Sudeikis, like where they would all come into the chorus and then they would all sing it together. Like those were some of my favorites. The airport security seminar sketch I remember from season 32, episode 1 is like one of my favorites that they've done. the Bronx Beat sketches with Maya and Amy. Like I thought that those were like really well written and good stuff. I mean, again, it's like a different era. Do I think that like would I say that this era for live sketches is the best era? Definitely not. Like I think that the second golden era, the one previous to what we're talking about here, is the one that I think leads the pack in terms of great writing in terms of live sketches. But I think there's like a really solid balance. But to say that the best stuff in season 20 is like better than the best stuff of the 90% of the history show, to me is like wild.
I'll go through this season and I'll tell you what I would put in, and if we showed people, and I would be so interested to see how it would play. I would put the Clinton audition cold open as something at the Steve Martin commercial. A bunch of the Travolta, Pepper Boy.
Yeah.
I'd put in Sandler's Hanukkah song, which still is played today every single year. I would put in possibly Fred Wolf's piece with David Hyde Pierce with Little Women. I thought the Bob Newhart, the very end, was brilliant for people that really got that joke, which was another David Mandel piece. I thought the John Goodman, so much of the John Goodman when he was there with Dan Aykroyd was unbelievable. I thought Smigel's Damon Wayne sketch was really funny with the summer camp. People still to this day with the Coveney with the Zagat's or Zagats with Farley and Sandler, which I thought when I watched it, I was like, this is okay. But people, for whatever reason, and it wasn't a classic when it came out by any
Yeah.
means. I'm telling you, looking it back,
It gets like the
those are,
special treatment of the like things get replayed in curated packages and then they become more famous because of that.
I think so. Those are just some ones off the
You
top of
forgot
my head.
Japanese game show.
Yes, Andy Breckman. I wish they had Andy Breckman the entire season. That would have been. I don't. Andy Breckman is him and George Meyer in terms of them not being on staff full time for only like maybe a season or two. The amount of home runs that they both had, unbelievable. But yeah, that's
Can I
another
propose
one.
a change to your take, which is that
Yeah.
um, there's a lot of people who feel that season 20 is the worst season in the history of the show. Like there's the notorious season 6, 11, and 20 that people talk about as being the worst seasons. I think that you can argue that the live material in season 20, or the best of the live material in season 20, catapults it out of being the worst season ever. But I think it would be a far stretch to say that this season's best live sketches are better than 40 other seasons.
I think if you did a best of, if you could take 10, maybe I'm wrong and stuff, but I think if you took the best of and you just take the edits and you take the stinkers out, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but
Well, you know, we did our curated sketch list when we were releasing this about like what I felt were, or what we felt were the essential best in sleeper sketches. And I'll
mhm.
tell you, like, just in terms of live sketches, like I put best as Quentin Tarantino's Welcome Back, Kotter, Pepper Boys, and Japanese Game Show were my best.
They
Um,
were brilliant.
they're really good stuff. The sleeper sketches we had were the multiple personalities sketch that was, I think, from the Roseanne show.
It was.
Yeah, that one, Martin Luther King Day from the January 14th, season 20, episode 10, and then the Denver airport sketch with Chris Elliott, the one that's like super meta about him leaving the
Yeah,
show.
Norm Hiscock. No, there were some brilliant ones. To go back to that Heather Locklear with, I think it was Smigel that wrote the Sound of Music, So Long Farewell sketch, which was absolutely killed. That season too, as well. If I did a best of, there were so many funny sketches. It was just there were some. The show had never been in a place where with some of those episodes individually and stuff. But I mean, again, there. I mean, Smigel basically told me even in Gene Demanian there were good sketches. So I mean, it just the writers and the actors at this point were not working together. They did not gel. And when they were working together, it's always the best. And it seems like sometimes, like I feel like right now they're maybe a little bit more of a writer show, or maybe it's a good cohesive show. But whenever I felt like when Kristen Wiig was there or Will Ferrell, when they were getting pushed, it became more of the cast and less about the writers.
Yeah,
Tom Davis told me when they started the show and when they were with Phil Hartman, the writers the actors were there to serve the writers. It was about the writers, and that's what the main thing was during the original cast, during the Phil Hartman years, and then subsequently after that, with Will Ferrell and McKinnon and all that, the shift changed and it became the opposite. Where, yeah, that it kind of turned. Do you see that?
I would say that I see like the alliances between the writers and the cast members were much stronger in the earlier seasons, where in modern times, the like a loyal writer who knows how to write in a specific cast member's voice doesn't exist as much. Like you have the Mikey Streeter duo.
They're amazing.
Yeah, and that's like that is so like old school to have somebody who's like dedicated who writes for you and you're this duo, one's a performer, one's an actor, and like you have that there. Not to say that Mikey doesn't write, or but just to characterize it. But now there's so many people, and we interview like a lot of them who get like the one season run and then they're done, they're one and dones, and they come on and they say that the single biggest reason they think they didn't stay is because they couldn't find that writer to connect to.
It's really, really hard when you go in. I mean, even Chris Elliott, when he was established and famous, said he expected all these people to write for him, and they didn't. I mean, it does seem like that alliance thing. I talked to somebody that was over there as a writer, and he said you have to take the walk of shame when you're a writer and just knock on the doors on Tuesdays and be like, will you write with me? And it's like you're asking somebody out.
Well, it's like crazy because like Andrew Dismukes was writing some brilliant pieces. He was a former writer, still writes, but he then became a cast member. And then last season on the show, season 49, he was paired with August White and a newer writer, and she is so smart and such a good writer. And they were writing some really great stuff together. And then she gets promoted to writing supervisor, so she sort of like spread more thin. And I could see in Andrew, who appeared a ton of times on the show, quantity wise, this season, but we lost some of the things that were written in his own voice. And that was like an underlying storyline that we saw in season 50.
It's so interesting now. I absolutely didn't know that. I mean, yeah, you need to get that alliance, and there were certain people that when one writer left, they were done. Julia Sweeney, when Christine Zander left, I mean, was done. I mean, she said she had a great experience up until 93, 94, and she said Lauren wanted her to stay, and she quit. And that season, it's just really, really stinks because I mean, Julia Sweeney had some great stuff when she was on the show for the 3 years, roughly three, yeah, the three, up to those 3 seasons and those good memories. And that season, I mean, she had to fight to get. She said to get on Patrick Stewart. She did, I think it was the last sketch of the night, which didn't do great. I think the audience by then was really tired, and I mean, it was really back then, anything if you got laughs up after update was considered a huge success. I mean, it was definitely harder after update for anything to do well. But yeah, that was definitely, she's an example of one of those people where I still can't believe with everybody that they hired. I mean, she kind of said that there were all these young people that they hired, Harvard people, and it was they looked at her as, she said that one of them looked at her like Grandma Moses, who if look up the reference, Grandma Moses, actual person. But yeah, it was really, really tough for that, just to see her that. And I would say Melanie Hutsell also.
They weren't hiring a lot of women to write for the show either.
They weren't. They brought in Marilyn Miller, who did not get a lot of stuff on. They brought in another person who I'm not going to mention, who I don't think they were there 1 year, and I don't think that they ever, to my knowledge, ever wrote on anything other again, any show, and I don't think they got anything on. But yeah, they were not. I don't know why they didn't hire some Groundlings or some Second City people, but it just yeah, they didn't hire many women, and Melanie Hutsell didn't have much. The final push that she had was when Nicole Kidman hosted, and they gave her her own sketch, which was before Update at the bar, where the whole joke is she thinks that these guys are hitting on her, and she's like, "I'm married," but they made her up to look like not attractive, and they're all hitting on Nicole Kidman, but she's like thinks that they're hitting on her, and it did okay, but that was the last push that she got that whole entire season. Maybe they gave her a Jan Brady on Update, which played okay, but I mean, that was just a rough, rough place to be. I think for everybody, but definitely the ladies were not getting a lot of stuff on.
Yeah, definitely. And then you could imagine you being like Laura Keitlinger or Janine Garofalo and coming into this season 20 where there's basically no women to write for you at all.
I mean, Laura Keilaner had the hardest thing of all time, which is it was announced to the trades that she was gonna be doing Update with Norm Macdonald. I mean, it was gonna happen, and Norm, for whatever reason, I don't know what the timing was, or if it was that they wanted to do this, but that it got leaked. I don't know if they formally announced it, but it got in the trades that they were gonna do Update together. Norm he said, "I'm not doing it with somebody." He said, I would rather give it to Franken. If I'm not doing it by myself. And it's so amazing to think that this guy did this because he was his second season on the show and he had zero leverage whatsoever. And that can you imagine today that somebody would turn down a Weekend Update, a stand up, because that anybody that's a stand up, that's the gig that you want, is Weekend Update. And the fact that he said he would rather just not do it, and that I think it was even during that week, the production week, because they would normally start like a week before the actual first production week. And I think it was days leading up that they still weren't sure if it was going to be Kiteliner and him. But I mean, oh gosh, she was on Stern, I believe, talking, or she did some interview saying not great stuff about Norm. And I'm guessing that would be maybe one of the reasons. I could be off.
Yeah, I can imagine. Honestly, I think history like shows that that was probably the right decision, regardless. But yeah, I mean, it just like there was no supportive environment for something like that. Like there was no Tina Fey who comes in and was like, "Well, why don't we write sketches that have like four women in them?" You know, like it
Yeah,
wasn't. We were still a few years away from that.
they needed her. I remember Laura Keitliner did an update. I think it was the first show, and it was went well. I thought it went okay, but I remember like the Daily News saying this was the worst thing we have ever seen on the show, which is ridiculous to say. I mean, it was just mean for everything that's been on the
It was
show.
stilted. It was like Anne Risley esque. Like there was nothing there that was like, oh, her personality was able to come out and shine. And like again, there's a lot of reasons why that it got to that point, but I don't think it fully would have worked.
Anybody that's a first time person that's going out there where they do not know who you are, it's gonna be really tough. I mean, it's a few people have been able to break that, but when America's getting to know you, and I still go back to this because I think it's just so funny that people have such short memories, that how much Colin Jost, how long it took that guy to get over with the public. Reminds me of Conan O'Brien. I mean, they're both Harvard guys. They were both thrust in without really much performing experience. I mean, Conan had took some improv, and Colin was doing a little stand up, but they were put in front of the public. The public did not accept them, and it just took them a while to figure out. I still cannot believe that they made Colin, and he wrote this in his book, that they made him after his first year of Update re-audition for the job. And Lawrence said publicly, he said, there were people that would say, "What do you think of Colin?" And it was Cecily at first that was doing it. What do you think? And Lauren said to the person, "Oh, it doesn't work. It's not working right now. It's going to take time." And he was completely frank. And it was one of those things where sometimes you definitely just have to give the person time to grow into it. And then sometimes it doesn't work. And I'm not going to mention names, but they were able to make it work. But it took. How long do you think it took Colin for the audience to really get into him? I think it took a couple seasons. I mean, I think he was good. I think he really got more comfortable the second season. But in terms of the audience to get excited, it took a while.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it was partway through season 40, so into his second season doing it. I think he did like it wasn't joke swap, but he did something with Che that like really the chemistry like they weren't just doing jokes in silos. Like it really got to a point where they were communicating to each other, and I think that changed it where there was actual chemistry there because like when he was on with Cecily, he was very Seth Meyers light. You know, he told the jokes with a similar cadence to the way that Seth did it. He was just seen as like, okay, obviously Seth was there with Cecily earlier in the season, and it was just like, now this new person is there. And it took a while. And I think that him and Che had a friendship that started to develop. And then once they built that natural chemistry, like that was happening off screen and they brought it on screen, I think it really helped people. I would say watching it live, like I probably didn't notice how great they were getting until season 41. So I would say like I took it into his third season doing it, but it probably somewhere around season 40 that things started to click and they started to find what worked.
It's an amazing success story, and I'm so glad that they were able to keep him because if you had interference from a network, I don't know if the network would have kept him. I mean, they wanted Andy Richter gone from Conan on day one. And it was another thing where him and Conan just needed some time to figure that thing out. And when you put somebody that has America doesn't know who you are on update. It's tough. I thought Tina got it pretty quickly, I have to say. She was a rarity. I mean, that is extremely, extremely rare. She was that good.
Tina started
That
off
was exciting.
extremely strong, like one of the strongest
Yeah.
starts to any update performer ever. And then I think over time Jimmy got better, and maybe she like dropped her, like she lost some steam off her fastball towards the end of update. But
I
yeah,
think it's tough because I think Jimmy, he was just having fun and goofing around a little bit and did a great job. But Tina, the responsibility of being head writer and the amount of hours that she was putting in and the details to the show and to do that update job is unbelievable that she was able to do that and that Seth was still able to be head writer and not have all his focus. I really can't believe that how they were able to manage that. And like I would hear that Seth would in between dress and air, you would think you would be. I would want to focus entirely on update, and he's still, change this or rewriting other people's sketches, and it shows you how good. I mean, his
that's why I
skill
call him the
set
quarterback.
was.
I think he's the
Yeah,
like it's just a I love like Tina's legacy at the show is so important, but when she does leave to go do 30 Rock and Seth takes over, there is this like refreshing vibe to the show that just feels, like I said, a little bit experimental, and his footprints are all over that for a few seasons. And that's why like I think 32 to 34, even though there's a writer strike in the middle, is like one of the strongest runs in the show's history.
yeah. I mean, I think that thing that he wrote for was it what was it? Was it Eli Manning or was it Peyton Manning where he wrote that film piece with the kids was really
Peyton,
really
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
I thought that was
That's my favorite
amazing.
episode of all time, by the way.
It was really, really strong, and then you have John Lutz and, Will Forte who wrote is that the one where they dance
Yep, that
at
little locker room
halftime?
motivation at halftime.
Yeah, I've met Lutz a couple times, and I told him just I think that is I mean, when you look at Forte's, the spelling bee, certain things where I'm like, nobody would come up with that and be able to dance. And I loved hearing from Lutz that it went from how mild it was in dress rehearsal compared to on air where Forte just made it really big and that did not exist at dress with how big the movements he was doing as the coach.
Yeah,
And
it's an
that
amazing
when
episode, by the way. Smigel writes like an incredible TV funhouse called Morocco, which was a Dora the Explorer parody. There's Bronx Beat in there, which I'm a big fan of. There was the what else? Oh yeah, he did Tim Calhoun on Update. There's a really really good Lutz and Kristen Wiig piece called Porch Talk, where she again demonstrates how good of an actor she is, opposite of Peyton. Um, that episode is like it's arguable that like there's no duds in that episode.
there are certain episodes I would put, and I don't know if you feel this. I would say Alec Baldwin and Paul McCartney is definitely a top 10 for me. There's certain episodes where just from top to bottom are unbelievable. And then you have some like the best cold open ever with Steve Martin, James Taylor from December of '91, and then after that, it just goes. The rest of the show, for the most part, goes down.
Here's a fun exercise,
Um,
Mark. I'll ask you because we did we're doing this summer on the Saturday Night Network the top 50 greatest episodes of all time. So we put out a poll. We asked people to fill out a form. We're counting them down every week. So I know the results. I don't want to reveal them here for people who, if there's crossover listeners, but I'm curious from you if you had to guess what the top three episodes that were voted on in the history of the show. What do you think they were?
It depends. I don't I'd have to look at your demos because if there's anybody your age, it's gonna even though everybody that's been on the show, they're for the most part people your age, they are not gonna know who Garrett Morris is. They couldn't tell you who Melanie Hotzel was, and I don't think that for people to if people are voting on this, they need to have a knowledge of the entire history of the show. Do you agree or not?
I agree, and I will tell you that the voting indicates that people had a great knowledge of the history of the show. So yeah,
Wow.
we have numbers.
I don't know. I mean, I think maybe Steve Martin and the Blues Brothers I thought was strong. I think that was 78. I think goodness, I'd really have to look back at everybody who hosted. I thought Alec Baldwin, McCartney was really good. I think you mentioned one particular episode recently. We were talking to, I forget who it was. That it was very important with some of the sketches that they went that they did. I forget who it
Oh, are
was.
you thinking of perhaps Jack Black and Neil Young?
Yes, that's who. I thought that was extremely strong. I'd have to look. I thought that it was it Eli Manning or was it Peyton Manning? Peyton Manning,
Peyton
right?
Manning, we were just talking about, yeah.
Yeah, that was extremely strong as well. Those are the ones that maybe stand out. Am I close on any of them? Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that you said are definitely getting there. I don't want to reveal the exact results, but you know them. There's a couple that I think you'd be interested and fascinated that we could probably have a larger conversation about it once we reveal all the results publicly. But
I mean, there's again, if you go before, I would say maybe like before the sketches bombed. I feel like isn't that like a funny thing? Like you could have the show before when sketches bombed, and then you have when sketches don't bombed. It's like the two eras of I what do you can you pinpoint when that happened? By the way,
when what happened?
sketches stopped bombing.
I would say, uh, I would say sketches still bomb, but the
Mm,
studio will still laugh. So, like, even in the finale of the Scarlett Johansson episode that we just watched, there was a really bad sketch, and like,
is that the sketch that was the Mr. Willoughby one where they're doing it's is it takeoff of Jane Austen?
no, well, this it was. Maybe we're thinking of the same one. It was the one like the intimacy coordinators. Is that the one?
No, I was thinking of a different one that didn't do well when it aired, but it killed when they did it at UCB, with Tina and Rachel Dratch when they did Dratch and Faye, but it died on air. It was Scarlett Johansson.
Oh
I
no,
thought it was the
sorry.
last set.
Yeah, that's from 2006. I'm talking about the Scarlett Johansson episode that like just aired the finale of season
Oh,
50.
I see what you're
Yeah, yeah.
saying.
I'm saying like
Yeah.
even now, like there was a sketch that like it was an intimacy coordinator sketch. It was an absolute mess, and watching it, I was like, wow, this is a contender for the worst sketch of the season. And the audience like still like you hear chuckles because like that's what happens now. But like everyone was agreement that that was bad.
It's extremely rare though for something like that just to get chuckles. Like they'll laugh at almost anything. I mean, it's you're right. I
But
mean,
if your
sketches
definition of a
once in a
bomb
while.
is like the studio will laugh no matter what, like or sorry, or the studio won't laugh, then I will say that's probably been going on since we got into like the HD era. So like from like
So
2000
interesting.
in like the 2005 ish, because I think the last time I could really remember like dud episodes that there's no energy is in like season 30.
Yeah, you should see, like, it's amazing to get Steve Martin and Hanks the best host, and still after update, they would do these amazing sketches, and it was just the audience for whatever reason they just I don't know. It was definitely a really tough effort. Once in a while, I and then at the end of dress rehearsals, because you've been to the show many times, usually they put the sketch at the very end where they don't think it's gonna do well. Not I don't want to say that always, but maybe the least confident. And that Mary Cal I wish I could have been there for Molly Shannon doing Mary Catherine Gallagher address at Gabriel Byrne, the very last sketch, which normally is the death slot where the audience is completely dead and it just explodes. Have you ever been there for dress and seen one of those sketches at the end of the show do well? Normally, if they get cut. I've seen them get cut, but
Yeah, I don't usually go to dress, but I have a lot of like friends that do. Um, and sometimes the dress show is like way better than the air show.
all the
And
time that thing that can happen. Back when the Will Ferrell was there, I would talk to some of the writers, and they would say we had an amazing dress in the live show for whatever reason. It's so strange. I
that
wish
happened
they.
with Mikey Madison's show this season, where I was getting like a ton of texts of like, "Get ready, this is gonna be great." and then the live show was like, what are we talking about?
It's so strange. You could get the same, the same. This would happen with comedy. With stand-ups, we'll say you do the 2 shows, the same material, that you do it the same way, and it's just 2 audiences, and one will, just never know the circumstances of everything. But I'm glad we got to talk about the show. There's very few people. We need to get Bill Carter back.
Yeah.
Maybe some people like Dan Pasternak. Who else are a few other people that can talk like this with you, like you and me, other than maybe getting someone like Smigel on, which
Well,
would be
yeah. There's
fun.
a lot of we have a lot of great personalities at the Saturday Network that are really experienced. One of
That
my
are as nerdy as us
Yeah,
on SNL.
yeah. I've reached out to the around the world and found some of us. But Bill Kenny is a guy who co-hosts with me this countdown that we're doing all summer long, and he is just incredible with this stuff. There's a lot of people out there who talk our language. But
Even the
yeah,
writers.
yeah, yeah,
That's
definitely. I mean,
amazing.
Andrew Dick, I'll give him credit. Love that guy from That Week in SNL. We have a lot of fun together, but he knows more about the SNL writers than a lot of people that I know. So
That's the stuff I'm interested in, and I know that, we both are still there's certain sketches where we're still trying to figure out who wrote what, and it's this obsession with certain people and stuff, but I would love for hopefully
But
could
I'll do
email
this again with you
Smigel
anytime you want, Mark,
get
because
him
for me, like, I
back.
think there is SNL is the perfect show for podcasting. It is just truly there's so many storylines. I know we didn't even go through every episode in season 20, but obviously the downhill there will continue and continue, and then there will be a quite the
I wanna
resurgence.
go on record saying that, I I Kristen Wiig, there were really funny sketches with the writing. I don't know. I just think that the writing it wasn't as emphasized as much as it was the groundlings, the big characters and stuff. And I think as somebody that was watching for the writing, I think that was tough sometimes. But
That's okay. You're allowed to
yeah.
value cast members based on the writing for them. That's totally fine. It's
Yeah, but
just
there were
not what
still, like, amazing people that were writing. You mentioned lots, and, I mean, people like, James Anderson and Paula Pell have grand slam sketches. I mean,
Spivey. There's a
yeah,
lot of
exactly, Spivey.
yeah, Seth. Like, there's a lot of really good people
Yeah.
from that era. I mean, the thing is just that like that's why in sports there's like hundreds of people that vote for a Hall of Fame because like you're
Yeah,
not.
people have different opinions. That's why Seth on the Vulture podcast, they asked him what was a sketch that you were jealous of that you thought that you would have thought of, and he came up with MacGruber, which I was just kinda like, there's certain things where I don't feel like that is a sketch. I feel like a lot of comedy people could come up with that. Like that's just you're doing a MacGyver type parody and just making it ridiculous. But I don't understand why he would have picked that out of all the sketches. Like, I mean, I feel like
It's a couple things. Number one, I think it's probably I don't I can't get in his mind, but I think it's like there's like a blackout humor there where the thread of the sketch is that as soon as Forte is going to say something like super racist, like it's just gonna the building's gonna explode. And I think like they don't get that in other sketches. Like they don't have the opportunity to let the building explode and then end on like shock value. So I think those type of jokes, I think he probably looks at it and he's like, those are really fun jokes to write for. And also, like, I think if you ask Seth, like, which performer he would want to write for out of like anybody in the history of the show, like Forte needs to be near the top of his list because he was just willing to take things further than anybody else was.
he did. I just thought it was a pretty it was fun sketch. It was just, but I was like, I think like a lot of comedy people could have come up with that. I was just very surprised that was the thing. Where like Robert Smigel, like I get points to Jack Candy, like how do you come up with something like that? And I know that that Seth does say that his guy is Jack Candy, which yeah, but I just not to take anything away from MacGruber. I did not see the movie. It got pretty good reviews. I heard it was funny. I mean, at the box
Do
office,
you
it had
notice how all of the greatest writers in the history of the show always point to the 10-1 writers as the ones that they are jealous of? Like a handy sketch, the like
Andy
John Solomon.
Breckman.
Yeah, exactly. The
Yeah,
Breckman, the John Solomon, Will Forte duo. Like, they
agreed.
always point to the ones that get on right at the end of the show that are kind of different, kind of weird. And I think it's just that everything can become really cookie cutter being there week to week. So to have like a writer who has like a different point of view on things, like to an extreme, I think is very appealing for comedy writers.
Yeah, for somebody to come in with a very unique voice like Will Forte is such a welcome thing. It's extremely hard to do something to put something out there that has never been done. or that is so out there, and I can get why they when they saw Forte, they were like, "We need this guy," and it's like the most amazing success story where he turns down the show and is just like, "No, no, you know what? I don't want it. I know I can't see myself doing it." And then they're like, "Well, open door," and thank goodness he came back. But yeah, it's an amazing. I get why a lot of people will point to that cast as the greatest cast. They're just talking about those single, not talking about necessarily the writers and the cast, but just they talk that cast about the talent. It's unbelievable. And
Season 32,
looking,
every cast member has hosted, or they're the announcer of the show, or they're Keenan.
and some of them have hosted, and they shouldn't have maybe were hosted. Am I wrong on that? Do you think that that's fair? Maybe not. Maybe that's
No, I mean, I don't think of like I mean, there's nobody there that I think like didn't deserve to get a shot. Not their episodes maybe weren't all like Fred Armisen's episode to me is amazing. Sudeikis' episode is amazing, but like Andy Samberg's time hosting was like not a great episode. It's just like it's kind of fun to have Andy back. So like Seth probably shouldn't have hosted, but like it's still fun.
No, I love that with him and Paul Simon. I love that he came back and he hosted, and I love when people like Mulaney will bring in David Byrne, and people when they bring in like the people that are not under 30, and they bring in specifically they request or they'll bring in their own like older people. I loved when Stevie Nicks came in. I hope they do more of that. I think that's um, very cool. And I don't know if they put the invite out to Catherine O'Hara to come back to host, but come on, people, bring her back to host. She was so good. I didn't know until I read an article that she wrote that sketch when she hosted in, gosh, am I going back to October of '92, maybe, with 10,000 Maniacs? She wrote the last sketch of the night, which was her as Marilyn Monroe and Nealon as John F. Kennedy at a Halloween party. And she
Yeah,
penned that sketch, and I had no idea until recently that she wrote that, which I don't know. I can't think of many hosts that get attribution on a sketch like that. I mean, maybe David Harbour. I think he said it at the time. It was Lily Allen's idea for the
the
Oscar the
Grouch.
Grouch,
Yeah.
the origin story. Um, but I thought that was pretty cool with
Yeah, it's
Catherine.
mostly stand-ups that I think who would come in and host and then bring in their own teams and then they end up contributing to sketches more. But I mean, obviously Catherine had a sketch background, was almost a cast member on the show. I think it's just something that she held on to and wanted to do here and had the chops to be able to pull it off. And Kevin was a great scene partner. So like that, yeah, it is a really cool story.
Yeah, she said it went very well at dress, and then something happened on air. I don't know. Who knows what happened? But
Yeah.
anyway, John, thanks for doing this, and I'm glad that we got to do this. We have to get Bill Carter back, maybe Dan Pasternak, Smigel would be good to bring in, and just go through other seasons of the show. And if you listening have any questions for John or myself or anything SNL or anything talk show related, please let me know. Some of you will message me privately, and I try to get back to you and stuff. But if you have anything that we might be able to answer, and I'll work on my Mount Rushmore. But John, yeah, thanks for doing this, and everyone check out the Saturday Night Network, and everybody check out Late Nighter for all of your late night needs. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. On Apple Podcasts, please rate it and leave a review. Be sure to go to latenighter.com for all your late night TV news. And you can find my podcast at latenighter.com/podcasts. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.